Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Barton. I'm here at North Carolina State University and will be the host behind today's webinar. Our webinar today is Pond Management, and it's brought to you today by the North Carolina Tree Farm Program. Before we kick things off, just want to remind you that you can get a copy of today's slides available on the page that you used to join today's webinar. I'll post that link here in a minute in the chat so that you have that available. We'll also be taking questions and answers at the end of today's session after the presentation. We ask that you use the Q&A feature of Zoom. By clicking on that icon, you'll be able to enter your question so that we can moderate those back out to our speakers today. If something comes up and you need to let us know that there's, poor audio or something like that, please enter that into the chat box and I'll be monitoring that for today's session. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie McCormick with the North Carolina Tree Farm Program.
Thank you, Bob. Before we get started, I want to tell you about an event that we have coming up on June the 14th. The North Carolina Tree Farm Program will be hosting its annual meeting at the Wake County Wildlife Club in Durham. Our program will focus on hunter safety, hunt clubs and landowner liability, prescribed burn associations, advancing conservation goals with timber management practices, and managing mixed stands for aesthetics and wildlife habitat. If you want more information about this or to register, you can go to our website at the address that's shown here. We're real happy to have Triangle Pond Management giving our presentation today. Roger Pittman is president of Triangle Pond Management. He has a degree in fisheries and wildlife conservation biology from North Carolina State University. Caleb Hopkins is the fisheries manager for Triangle Pond Management. He's an avid outdoorsman and has additional expertise in landscaping and hardscaping. Roger and Caleb have a combined 2 decades of experience helping landowners achieve their pond management objectives, whether it's growing bigger bass, treating aquatic weeds, or keeping their ponds healthy and attractive. Caleb and Roger, thank you so much for being our presenters today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Leslie.
Just getting the screen shared here, everybody, so we can get started. All right, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Leslie. We're going to jump right into it, guys. We got a lot of material to cover, so write down notes and we'll try to address any questions as we get to the end. Topics that we're going to cover today is real briefly our approach on pond management. We're going to talk a little bit about new pond design and considerations when homeowners want to build a pond on their property. We're going to talk about stocking and harvesting. We're going to talk about harvesting insights and methods that we use. And then we're going to talk pretty intensively about all the different calls that we take. And we're going to try to cover everything that we get calls about in the last part of the presentation. So real quickly, just our approach on pond management. We focus pretty heavily on client goals and expectations for their pond. We understand that everybody's got limited resources, so we try to make the best use of those resources when we're talking to our clients. Different goals they may have might be a clean and healthy pond. They might want their pond to be aesthetically pleasing with a fountain in it. They may want to swim or boat. 90% of our clients are interested in fisheries management, so some of them want to grow large bass. Some have smaller ponds. They want their kids to be able to catch catfish and brim pretty readily. They want to have lots of fish, catchable fish, a balanced population. So our consults, when we start talking to clients about what they want to do, really depends on what their management expectations are for their property. Starting off the conversation here, we're going to talk about pond design and consideration. So these are the points that we think about when we walk a site with a client. And again, our number one consideration is the client's goals and expectations. So parts to a pond, you've got the structural parts, you've got your basin that holds the water, you've got the embankments, the side slopes, you've got a dam that's going to hold up the water if it's in a dam pond. You've got inlets that bring water into the pond, and then you've got some kind of outlet system that lets water leave the pond. The diagram on the bottom right of your screen kind of shows those pieces, those structural pieces of a pond together. And then you've obviously got the living aspect of a pond, which is the ecosystem. You've got plants, you've got fish, you've got all the water and the water chemistry that goes with it. And then you've got the microorganisms that are living within that system. There's two types of constructed ponds that we're going to deal with and we're going to work on for our clients. The first one is an embankment pond or a watershed pond. This is where you take machinery out to a site and you dam up an area that water is going to collect naturally, whether it be a draw in the woods or a stream or a spring that's feeding a creek or a ditch. You're going to dam that water up and try to impound it. The other type of pond that we can construct is what we call an excavated pond. That's very simply put, just digging down into the water table and allowing that water table to fill the pond. So the top two pictures on the screen here are two dam constructed ponds that we completed in the last year or two. And then the bottom picture is an example of an excavated pond. When you're talking about constructing a pond, you definitely got to consider your drainage. So you want to make sure that pond's going to stay full pretty much year round. You don't want it to ever dry out. That would be a problem. These numbers here aren't set in stone. They just kind of come from the literature. So in general, for pasture ponds, you want 5 to 20 acres of surface drainage for each acre of water that you have. And then for woodland ponds, you want 20 to 40 acres of surface drainage. So for a 1 acre pond, 5 to 20 in a pasture, and then 20 to 40 if you're in the woods. So straight off of drainage, you want to think about what your water source is going to be. And this is something that we look at when we're walking properties with clients. There's a diagram of the water cycle on your right, but you've got surface runoff. A couple points on that. It can lead to fluctuations in the pond in the spring and the fall. Streams are a good water source. They can be high in DO, but they have the potential to bring in unwanted vegetation or unwanted plants or wildlife. Springs are often a source of water in the ponds that we construct and we deal with. They're great, but they have the potential to lead to clear water, which if it's a shallow pond might lead to vegetation issues. And then shallow groundwater ponds like an excavated pond dug in a field does have the potential for poor water chemistry. Not always, just a couple points to be aware of for your water sources. So site preparation, when we're out there and the pond doesn't have any water on it, when we're constructing the dam, we want to think about the traffic considerations. Are you going to be driving an ATV over the dam? Will you ever take a truck or a tractor? Typically 12 to 16 foot wide is a good generic width for a dam. You definitely don't want to have like a bowl as your pond. Vary in depths for transition areas for different stages of life, and plant material to grow is a good consideration to be thinking about. There's a diagram of that in the bottom right of your screen. You can kind of see where the plants are growing down to where the predatory fish like a bass would predate on bluegill. And then if you're going to install structure, 20 to 25% seems to be the number out of literature as far as how much of the pond needs to be done up in structure. The picture on your top left there is some artificial structure that was installed on the pond that was dewatered for a pipe repair. But structure can be, artificial stuff that's made out of plastics. It can be brush piles, rock piles, stake beds. Some people drop trees in their pond. That's structure. Sizing wise, for a 1 acre pond, 6 to 8 feet in depth seems to be an adequate amount of depth for the pond. You really don't need more than 10 or 12. It gives you no benefit and increases the chance of fish kills due to thermal stratification of the pond. Less than 6 foot of depth, you're going to have the increased potential for vegetation issues. So aquatic weeds might take root and grow because of the sunlight penetration. 3 to 1 slopes on the dam and the slopes, if possible, just kind of helps eliminate erosion control issues. And then vary in depths, like I spoke about in the last slide, for different stages of life of the pond is always good to think about. For your control structure, this is talking about your outlet system, what allows the water to leave the pond. You definitely want to have some kind of system that you can bring the water down if you want to for repairs, leaks, harvesting of fish, vegetation control. There's a number of reasons why you'd want to have a valve in the pond so you can control the water levels. Having a trash rack on your standpipe is going to keep that from getting clogged with debris or turtles or anything that's going to impede the water flow from the pond, potentially leading to high water. The picture on the top right is a system that is designed to draw water from the bottom of the pond. Those can help with those thermal stratification issues in the late summer, bring in the cold water out of the pond instead of the top oxygenated level of water. And then typically, if we're doing it from scratch, we're always going to recommend some type of emergency spillway so that during those heavy rainfalls, like during a storm, the water's got somewhere to go if the primary system gets overflowed with water. Some final thoughts on construction of ponds from scratch. You're definitely going to want to vegetate slopes and dams quickly. That's going to help reduce erosion and sedimentation back into the pond. If possible, installation of 4 bays where the water is coming in can help as like a settling pool to clean the pond out later. If you've got a stream that brings in sand and sediment and silt, it's going to get filled up. It's a lot easier to clean out a 4 bay than it is to clean out the entire pond. You're going to want to armor any areas of high water flow because water creates erosion. Everybody think of the Grand Canyon. It's the same way on outlets of ponds that can really carve out the earth with water just flowing on it with no protection. And then consider any kind of structure aspects. If you want to put in fish structure or if you want to put in a dock, it's a lot easier to work with the water out of the pond than it is with the water in the pond. And then finally, if you've got acidic soils, which a lot of North Carolina does, it's a lot easier to apply lime before the pond fills than when it is full of water. But we'll talk more about liming later. Lastly, permits. There are different permits and stuff to consider if you're working around wetlands or streams. There's a bunch of different agencies that are in control of the stuff, the Army Corps, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Wildlife Resource Commission. We've got some general information on that, and we talk to clients about it when we're talking pond design and construction on new properties. Typically, we're always going to recommend getting a licensed engineer involved. We've got several that we've worked with over the past 10 years that are very fluent in this stuff now because we've built several ponds throughout the years. We're usually going to like to get that third party involved to make sure all the paperwork is in order. So that was pond design and construction. I'm going to turn it over now to Caleb, and he's going to talk about stocking and harvesting.
Hey guys, thank you guys for having us again. Kind of go over the stocking and harvesting and fish we want to introduce into a pond and maybe how we want to regulate that population. Fish selection, and the typical fish you're going to see in ponds in North Carolina are going to be your largemouth bass, your bluegill, your red ear, your channel catfish. Now there are some other fish like fathead minnows and grass carp, shiners, things like that that can be added into a pond, but those 4 are typically going to be what you're going to see in the pond. So your first option for stocking is going to be your fingerling stockings. So this is going to be, if you had based off of an acre, and it's going to vary whether or not your pond is going to be fertilized or unfertilized. But bluegill, we're typically going to recommend around 350, red ear, 150, channel catfish, 50, and largemouth bass, 50. Option 1 is going to be great because it's economical. It's a common option for a bluegill and bass fishery, which most of our ponds are. It's going to allow you to have a sunfish harvest, 2nd year post-stocking, a bass harvest, 3rd year post-stocking at the 12 to 14-inch range, and a catfish supplemental stocking as needed. This is mainly going to be a lot for ponds under 10 acres, and we want to avoid the hybrid sunfish because they can reproduce in various of different ways through their cycle. Option 2, this is going to be a little bit bigger of a fish, fish that we're stocking. The numbers are going to be a little bit lower because we're starting with a bigger fish that are hopefully going to be spawning, sooner than those small fingerlings. With this stocking, we're going to do 70 bluegill, 30 red ear, and 20 largemouth bass. This is going to be a little bit more expensive stocking, but it's also going to be able to allow you to fish a little bit faster and be able to catch and release a little bit sooner. Harvest sunfish after the 1st year, harvest the bass after the 2nd year, and red ear, if you wanted to replace them, replace the bluegill, can be done. Option 3, this is going to be, your bluegill, red ear, and largemouth again, in that 3 to 5 inch range. At 60 per acre on your bluegill, your 15 per acre on your red ear, and 100 per acre on your largemouth. Option 3 can be used when larger bass are going to be harder for you to find. It allows time for the sunfish to spawn in the summer before we, start introducing the bass. The red ear can be replaced by bluegill if desired as well. Option 4, this is going to be for when you want a pond that you just want a, a bluegill and a catfish pond. Typically, we're going to stock these in June or July, and the catfish rate is going to be 100 per acre, and hybrid sunfish is going to be 300 per acre. This is a good option for those small ponds. Some bass can be stocked to help control the sunfish population. Supplemental stocking can be expected because of the reproduction. And these fish are going to adapt great to feeding, whether it's hand feeding or a, automatic fish feeder. Just a quick note on that stocking, those are, generic, just kind of guidelines that we go by, but depending on what you're wanting to do with your pond, whether you're wanting it just to be a healthy fishery and you're not planning on doing, trophy bass management, or if maybe you want to do trophy bass management, those numbers can all be, varied a little bit. When it comes time to harvest your bass, you're going to want to delay the bass harvest until about the 12 to 14 inch range. Stock bass should support the fishery for 3 to 4 years. The bass harvest rate of 10 to 15 pounds per acre per year is a really good rate to kind of go by guideline wise. You can go a little bit over that, but that's a really good guideline that you're going to want to pull out every year. That can be doubled if you are fertilizing the pond. Overharvesting can lead to unbalance between the bass and the sunfish. So we don't want to take out too many bass. We want to take out that right amount. Catch and release can lead overabundant and stunted bass. So, with putting our bass back in there and constantly never pulling any out, we're increasing the number of predatory fish while keeping our bluegill numbers the same, causing a lack of food source for those bass. And then try to spread out your harvest over the year and keep really good records of it. And that way you can, if you ever have to call us or you call your local fisheries biologist, you're able to give them some really good information on, what you pulled, how many you pulled, and what time of the year you pulled them. Harvesting your sunfish. So you're going to want to harvest around 40 to 80 pounds per acre per year. This is not essential if bass populations are maintained. With a proper bass population, they may help maintain your sunfish levels for you. Hybrid sunfish and catfish are maintained by stocking, so harvest at will. So here's a couple things on, what different populations and, what you're finding when you're doing a fish survey can tell you about your pond and how your fishery is doing. 3 indicators are, the fish of harvestable size, annual reproduction, combination of fishes with at least one predator species, and bluegill 6 inches and larger, and bass averaging 1 to 2 pounds, some larger and some smaller. That's going to be a really good balanced population. Now, when we get into overcrowding of bass, this is typically when we're going to see, bluegill average more than 1/3 of a pound, the bass average less than a pound, and it may be good for large bluegill. However, we have too many bass, and the small bluegill that are spawning, they can't keep up as a viable food source for the number of bass. Some corrective actions on this are going to be harvesting 20 to 30 bass per acre. You can also go by that, poundage, but you may want to increase that, 15 to 20 pounds a little bit higher. Winter drawdown, so we can consolidate the fish, make it a little bit easier for the fish to be found, and for us to be able to, pull them out. We can feed the sunfish, which is going to help stimulate the growth a little bit, be able to give that bass a little bit bigger of a bluegill to eat versus so many small ones. Or we can fertilize. So with fertilization, we're starting at the bottom of the chain, and we're growing those microorganisms, which are going to feed our bluegill and so on and so forth up the ladder. Overcrowding of sunfish. This is when you're going to have, mainly 3 to 5 inch bluegill few bass, but averaging 2+ pounds. This is really good trophy bass potential. So this is when we have plenty of food source for those fish. We don't have as many bass, but they're all going to be nice and big. Some corrective actions on this are going to be to maybe slow down your bass harvest. We can stock a little bit more bass, adding, 50, 6 to 8 inch bass. We can feed the sunfish. We can fertilize the pond, and we can harvest the sunfish at a more heavier rate, or up to 100 pounds an acre. We can also do that winter drawdown as well. Some undesirable species that we may not want in our pond are going to be black crappie, white crappie, warmouth sunfish, blue catfish, white perch, green sunfish, flathead catfish, bullheads, and carper suckers. Some of these fish are going to be because they're mainly competing with our bass. So if we're trying to grow a healthy, bass fishery, we don't want things like blue catfish that can be aggressive, or a black crappie that can, reproduce in high numbers, taking up our resources that our bass are trying to use. Some solutions to the undesired species are going to be keeping the large bass population up through stocking, as well as that management. Culling heavily undesired species through either fishing, shocking, or netting. And in some cases, we have to reclaim a pond, where we either use a rotenone application, or we use aluminum and hydrated lime to be able to change the pH and then balance it back out. Some harvesting methods are going to be hook and line, pulling seine nets, and electrofishing. Hook and line, some things that if you're using hook and line to do your fish survey, larger bluegill and 1 to 2 pound average bass is going to show that balanced population. Bluegill averaging 1/3 of a pound and bass average less than a pound, again, is going to be that bass crowded. Small bluegill in the 3 to 5 inch range and a few bass larger than 2 pounds is going to be your sunfish crowded. And undesirable fish, just go ahead and pull them out. Your seining method, you should see some 3 to 5 inch bluegill in a balanced population. You're also going to see some young bass, many hatched bluegill, maybe some small bass as well. That's going to reflect more of a bass crowded situation when you're seine netting. No young bass and no hatched bluegill. Many 3 to 5 inch bluegill though is going to mean a sunfish crowded pond. Young bass and no hatched bluegill, no 3 to 5 inch bluegill. That means we need to add maybe some bluegill that we're absent of. And then no game fish present, it's undesired. Electrofishing. This is another way that we can do a fish survey to really get a good idea of our fish population. With electrofishing, typically we're going to see in a balanced population larger bluegill and a 1 to 2 pound bass average. Bluegill are going to average 1/3 of a pound and bass average less than a pound, and that bass crowded. Small bluegill 3 to 5 and a few bass larger than 2 pounds equals sunfish crowded. And undesirable fish, I'm typically going to pull those as well while we're doing it.
All right, guys. So now we're going to talk about the pond management in general, the calls that we get, and some information on those and solutions that we will talk our clients through. So one of the calls we get is, I want to lime my pond. Most ponds in North Carolina are naturally acidic. It's just the way it is here. The ideal pH range that we look for is a 6 to a 9. Ideal alkalinity would be above 20 ppm parts per million. A soil test prior to liming can tell you how much material you need to use. So we typically will always recommend that. That way we're not over applying material. Some of the products that we use are liquid lime products. One that we really favor is called Calcis. 5 gallons of Calcis equals 1 ton of ag lime. So it's just much easier to apply that product, especially when there's water already in the pond. But if you were going to use ag lime, you can. It's just a lot harder. So 1 ton of ag lime raises the pH by 1 point. we're typically going to apply this product when we're doing it from a boat, and we're going to allow the prop or the motor to spread it out, and it'll diffuse throughout the water column. We get a few calls about fertilization. We don't fertilize a lot of our ponds. Typically, the calls that we get are, my pond is green, I don't want it to be green, or I've got this weed, I don't want this weed. Most of the time, if we're talking fertilization with a client, it's going to be a client that's primarily focused on fisheries. They want to grow big bass. Typical ponds can support 100 to 150 pounds of fish per acre. That's a kind of a general number. When you fertilize a pond, you're increasing the food chain from the bottom. So the phytoplankton all the way up to the bluegill, all the way up to the bass that eat the bluegill. So you're basically feeding more, you're increasing the carrying capacity by increasing the food supply. We don't recommend fertilizing if a pond is naturally fertile. A lot of the ponds that we deal with are farm ponds, and they've got fertilizer runoff from crops, so they're naturally fertile. We don't recommend fertilizing ponds with high flow rates and no fishing pressure. Fertilizing a pond does have the potential for issues. So if you've already got aquatic weeds and you fertilize, you're just compounding the issue. Now, if you don't care about aquatic weeds and you want to grow big bass, it might be for you, but we're going to talk about situations like that individually with clients. If you're going to fertilize your pond, you need to have adequate alkalinity, you need to have low turbidity, and you need to have pretty much next to no vegetation issues to start. We get calls about feeding fish. I want to feed my fish. Feeding fish is great. It can increase their size and weight pretty quickly. That'll help with your harvest rates. You can harvest more because you're growing more. We typically don't recommend feeding if you're fertilizing. There's really no point to. Bluegill, sunfish, catfish, they readily take feed, so you can help bulk them up. Bass don't really care for it much. They're going to feed on the natural prey that's in the pond. So we say bass don't really take feed well. They will in a hatchery, but not in a natural pond setting. If you have triploid grass carp in your pond, they will take feed, and just keep in mind that that's going to reduce their effectiveness because you primarily put them in a pond to feed on aquatic vegetation. And if they're full, they're not going to eat. If you're going to feed in the spring and the fall when the temps are between 65 and 90. And then make sure you choose a high quality feed. Don't get something that's got a bunch of filler in it. Some numbers to keep in mind is about a 40% crude protein. That's what our feeds here at Triangle Pond have. Habitat improvement, which we touched on a little bit in some earlier slides, can improve fishing and production. If you're gonna install habitat, the number to keep in mind is about 25% of the pond bottom. Don't exceed that. Some examples are going to be brush piles, stake beds, artificial structures, plants, aquatic vegetation can be good structure if you keep them controlled. And then we install a lot of spawning beds for bluegills as well. So the pictures you have here are just a couple examples of different types of artificial structure that we use. We tend to favor the artificial structure because it lasts longer and it doesn't degrade, so you don't have to replace it over time. We get a few calls every year about fish kills. Fish kills typically, while they're scary when they're happening, they're typically not going to be from herbicide usage or pH issues, water quality issues, or disease. Most of the time in the late summer, and we've had a couple calls this year already, is a fish killer is a result of a pond turnover, which means that the layers in that pond have flipped and the oxygen just goes away where the fish were at, and then that stresses them out and they die. So that can happen when it turns over. If you did have a herbicide treatment, it's typically not the chemical that's doing the killing, it's the plant die-off. Plants are no longer producing the oxygen. They're using the oxygen at night, and you have a decrease in DO. Typically, if you have a natural pond turnover, you won't see the entire pond killed off. So if you see a few floating around the edges, you still have fish in your pond. Typically, you don't kill 100% of the pond. Solutions for fish kills, if your pond is kind of a candidate for that and it happens every year. We'll talk a little bit about aeration here. We love aeration. There's a lot of good benefits to aeration. Diffused aeration is the best. It allows for mixing of the water column, which gives multiple benefits. You've got increased dissolved oxygen. You've got more oxygen throughout the entire pond. So not just in the top level of the water. It's going to help increase your water quality. It's going to reduce nutrient loading, and you're going to have reduced chances of fish kills because of all that stuff. Keep in mind when you're putting aeration into your pond, you need to make sure it's sized adequately, because you have to have a certain number of CFCMs to turn that pond over the correct amount of times for it to be of any benefit. You don't want to put a small system in a huge pond. You might just be throwing your money away at that point. Just talking about aeration a little bit more, there's fountains out there and surface aerators. Just kind of two other types of not aeration, but systems that you can buy. You need to know what the differences are. So fountains typically look really good on a pond. They make a big display, but they don't do much as far as aeration is concerned. Surface aerators have a display, and they're going to move a lot more water, so they can have some aeration benefits, but they're only going to aerate the top level of the water. So if you've got a deeper pond, while you might be aerating the top level of the water, the bottom level is kind of staying stagnant. It's still stratifying. So if your main concern is a display, fountains and surface aerators can be a good choice. If your main concern is to aerate the pond for the ecological benefit, you're going to want to do a diffused aeration system. We get a lot of calls about nuisance animals, muskrats, nutria, beavers, otters on this first slide, and there's another slide, but a few more. Muskrats can cause erosion issues. You'll see them burrowing into your side slopes. They make holes in reels when it rains. All that stuff washes into the pond. You have an erosion problem. Nutria can do kind of the same thing, and they will also predate on your plants if you've got beneficial plants that you want to have. Beavers, they destroy everything. They knock down all your trees. They put up huts. They make dams. If you've got an outfall or an outlet, they don't like the sound of running water, so they'll typically put the block on all that stuff, raising your water level. We don't really like beavers. Otters, we get a few calls about otters every year. They can predate on fish populations pretty heavily. And if you're stocking grass carp, those are some of the first fish to go because they're slower and they catch them faster. A couple of other species we take calls about are turtles, whether it be sliders or snapping turtles. Typically, yes, they can eat the fish, but they're not going to destroy fish populations. If people want to get rid of them, we can trap them out. We get calls about snakes. Snakes aren't really an issue. It just depends on how you feel about snakes personally. And then we get calls about waterfowl, primarily Canada geese, because when they get abundant, they can cause erosion issues. They drop all over the turf around the pond, and they're just kind of a little nasty in general. This slide's just showing a couple bits of damage that we've taken on sites over the years from beavers, starting to cut down trees, putting up a hut. The top two pictures on the right there of a spillway pipe that was completely covered over by beavers. Again, they don't like that running water. They're trying to impound the water, so they got habitat. Some solutions for nuisance animals. Typically, we're always going to trap them out. We don't really relocate. We trap them and remove them. You can reduce the habitat when you're talking about, snakes or any of the other species. For Canada geese, you can put borders around your pond. If they can't easily get in and out of the pond, that's going to help deter them. The bottom picture is of a fence that was put up that works pretty well on a site. I think that came from a North Carolina wildlife presentation. You can have a natural border around your pond, which is great, but just keep in mind that that's perfect habitat for snakes. So typically our answer to nuisance animals is to try to trap them out. We get a lot of calls about muddy or turbid water. So the picture here on the right is a couple of ponds that we've managed. Top pond, for some reason, remains fairly clear. The bottom pond for the last few years has always been muddy. Not really sure why. But muddy water is common with newly installed ponds. So all those things we talked about during the pond design slides, vegetate quickly, install forebays can help. Test your water if you've got a muddy pond. The test for that is take a jar, let it sit for 24 to 48 hours. If the sediments settle out, it's likely a physical issue with the pond, whether it be undesirable fish species mucking up the bottom, putting sediments into the water column. If you've got cattle, they might be wading in and out. If you got geese, they can help contribute. If the water doesn't clear up in 24 to 48 hours, it's probably a water quality type issue, and there's different ways to solve that. So some solutions that you can look into, as we said, vegetate any bare areas, remove any undesirable species in the pond that might be contributing, limit livestock wading, reduce the waterfowl population, and install 4-base settling pools. If you want to treat muddy water chemically, you can. Aluminum sulfate, alum, is a great way to do it. But do some calculations up front via a jar test and figure out how much product to apply. So you basically start with a control, and then you figure out the concentration of alum to get the water to the clarity that you desire. And then you apply the product. And then as a good starting point, we will usually recommend a lime treatment because of all the other benefits that lime has for a pond as a starting point, probably prior to introducing alum into a pond. We get lots of calls about pond leaks. Common leaks are going to be from infiltration from uncompacted soils. We get a lot of issues with outlet systems that have leaks around them or inside of them, compromised pipes. Some solutions to your pond leaks, if you have infiltration, can be the installation of a clay or a rubber liner. Sodium bentonite is used with clay liner installations. That's worked well in the past for us. There's a relatively new product to us that we've been trying. It's worked on a few of our ponds called Soil Flock. It's a flocculate treatment that you put in the pond, not unlike alum, but similar to it. You can apply that with the water in the pond, so it's a more economical option to try first prior to going out there with heavy machinery and a bunch of clay. If you've got a problem with your outlet system, you've got to determine where that repair needs to be made at. If it's a disconnected joint or a crack or a hole, if it's going around the pipe, you can install an anti-seep collar or concrete cradle. And then worst case scenario, if you don't know what's going on, but you know the water's going from the pond to the outlet side, you got to dig it up and replace the whole system. So now that we're, those were a bunch of common calls that we take. And then we obviously get tons of calls on nuisance vegetation. This is going to draw us towards the end of the presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Caleb and let him talk about nuisance vegetation and all the different ways that you can combat that.
Yeah, so one of the main calls that we get a lot of the times, like Roger said earlier, is, hey, I've got this weed. I don't like it. It doesn't look good, or it's covering my pond. And sometimes, it can always be something different. Sometimes it's algae, whether it's planktonic or it's filamentous. Maybe it's submerged plant. So it's either under the water, something like hydrilla, allodia, your naiads, your water milfoils, or your chara. And then sometimes it's an emergent. So this is going to be rooted in the bottom, but then it's going to break the water surface. And that's going to be things like alligator weed, lotus, cattails, spike rush, water shield, primrose, smartweed, and parrot's feather. There's going to be different types of, tons of other different types of vegetation, but these are some of the main ones we come across day to day. So ways that we can control vegetation. One way is through physical removal. So this is a spillway that we typically clean a couple times a year. And this one is, we get out there and we're just hand removing it, or it can be done by machinery. Herbicide application. We do a good bit of herbicide applications. This is going to offer some quick results. It can be pretty economical when compared to the physical removal. And, it's not going to always treat the cause, but it is a good solution for, maintenance and staying on top of it. Here's an application that we did. I believe this was an alligator weed treatment we did a while back, and this was 2 weeks post application. So that bottom picture is going to be, before we treated, and 2 weeks after, you can kind of see where, everything is starting to die off. And at that point, it's starting just to decompose. So here's a couple of chemical options. The ones on the left that we, some that we typically use. There's a few on the right that, not to say that they don't work any, as good as the, the options on the left, but the options on the left are something that we typically use and can typically be pretty economical. Now, some herbicide considerations to take into consideration are going to be, public image, off-site movement, irrigation. Are we going to irrigate our crops out of it? Drinking, is this water, going Is it going towards our well system? Are we pulling water directly out of the water source? Fishing, recreational and swimming, livestock usage, and fish kills. All of these herbicides that you use on your label is going to have all of that different information on it. How soon can you let your livestock back into the water? How soon can you irrigate your tomato plants out? Treating during the summer or on cloudy days is something we want to look out for, as this can lead to low oxygen levels. Your target plant may grow back in the season with preventative measures. And then once target plant is gone, others may take its place. As that plant's breaking down, it's releasing nutrients into the water, which sometimes another plant wants to absorb. One of the main things too is, with herbicide considerations, is to figure out, what your target species is and make sure it's identified correctly. And then we work into our water quality. So our water quality can affect different treatments, so with flumioxazin, and, carfentrazone, our pH is going to make a difference. Hardness and alkalinity. Your copper products are going to be a little bit more toxic at low alkalinities. Turbidity. So when using diquat, that diquat can bind to a lot of those clay particles that are, floating in the water, causing it to be a little bit less than effective. And then copper. Copper is a typical algicide that we're going to use on most of our algae treatments. However, during the wintertime, before that water gets, into the, mid 50s to 60s, copper can be ineffective on algae. Some application methods. That's going to be a big consideration, is how you're going to apply it. So whether that's, through a backpack sprayer or using a granular that you're going to spread via a spreader. And then different plants, need to be dispersed inside beneath the water surface, injected into the water column. Another good source of control is biological control. Some ways we can biologically control it are through using grass carp. These are going to be effective on things like hydrilla, chara, alodia, bladderwort, naiads, pondweeds, coontail. They're going to be less effective on duckweed, milfoils, parrot's feather, and algae. Algae, grass carp typically aren't going to eat it. Maybe if there's nothing else left in the pond, but it's just not something that we're typically going to recommend as a control agent. Something also not recommended is going to be the watermeal, eelgrass, smartweed, lotus, lilies, and cattails. Grass carp, we're typically going to stock these at 10 to 15 an acre for control, 10 to 20 an acre on larger ponds. This is all going to depend on too, how much vegetation is in the pond. These are going to typically provide control for 5 to 8 years after being stocked. Stocking with larger fish helps, reduce the predation by bass. So typically we're going to stock an 8 to 10 inch fish. And then we're going to supplement this. So 20% year to a year to account for the losses. You are going to lose some to, things such as, nutrient muskrats or, herons pecking at them, or just natural causes. You may need a permit, depending on what how big of a body of water you're stocking. So if it's anything more than 10 acres, it's going to be more than 150 grass carp. And depending on your outlet structures, how easily these grass carp can get into your downstream. Another good source and a good way to help control, our vegetation is through, pond dye. We typically use a quart per acre of our dye. We can use blue or black. It's going to be fish and it's going to be animal safe. And this can help reduce the plant's growth by limiting the sunlight penetration. You can almost think of it as sunglasses on top of the water. So it's just shading that bottom, helping prevent that sunlight from reaching it, being able to grow some of that aquatic vegetation. Another way we can control vegetation is through the drawdowns. So like with the fisheries management, when we want to consolidate the fish, We can also do drawdowns to expose some of those plants. It can allow for some of the treatments and die-offs to be a little bit easier. Bass can better feed on the bluegill. Typically we're going to want to do this in the fall, winter time. Water is going to be a little bit cooler and fish aren't going to be quite as stressed. Pond deepening. So certain plants, maybe alligator weed and primrose, things that are, emergent and are rooted on the bottom but are coming up out of the surface. These can be plants that are going to be growing in that shallower water. One way that we can, steer away from this is through dredging, digging it out and deepening around the edges to make it a little bit harder for that weed to infest.
All right, guys, that's pretty much our presentation. I wanted to do some resources here for you and some acknowledgments on where some of the content from this came from. So NC State puts out a great pond management guide that was updated here. It's a good starting point for general information. There's a link to that. That second link there is a good resource for aquatic plant identification and treatment methods. And then finally, ncwildlife.org is another good resource for fish species and life histories and that type of stuff. So that's everything that we have, and I'll turn it over to Robert to see if we have any questions.
All right, and we have received questions. And folks, please continue to use the Q&A feature of Zoom asking your questions. And thank you both, Roger and Caleb, for a wonderful presentation. Our first question is from Keely. Indicated building a 20 by 20 pond. How deep do you recommend?
So a 20 by 20 pond is pretty small. We would probably go off of that one slide that we had the recommendations on. I would have it at least 7 foot, if we can, but a 20 by 20 pond is pretty small. As deep as we could get it to lessen the sunlight penetration is going to lead to less aquatic plant vegetation issues in the future once the pond is dug. So somewhere 6 to 8 feet probably.
All right, and then Keely also would like advice on keeping down mosquitoes.
So keeping down mosquitoes, we do get a few calls a year about mosquito populations. In ponds that flow pretty good, that don't have stagnant water, you really don't have issues with mosquitoes. And then if you're going to build that 20 by 20 pond, stock it up with some bluegill and catfish, and the bluegill will take care of the mosquito population. They're going to predate on those larvae when the mosquito lay the eggs. There's a fish called a gambusia that you might put in there as a supplemental fish. They're called mosquito fish because they predate on those same larvae that the mosquito produce.
Okay, next question is from F. Hernandez. Are ponds and littorals the same?
Ponds and littorals, maybe littoral.
Littorals, sorry. Littorals.
Yeah, so ponds are ponds, and then littoral is kind of referring to the shallow land area around the edges of a pond, a littoral area. Typically where littoral plants are going to grow. So you've got plants that grow on the shallow land that never stay wet, and then you've got going down into the pond in that littoral zone, you've got different plants that start to grow in the water. I think that's what he's talking about, the littoral zone around a pond.
Okay. This question's from Kelly Hester. They've heard yes and no for using 2,4-D for maintaining lily pads. What's your recommendations to keep them from taking over the pond?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, 2,4-D is a product that we typically use. Some of those, I can't remember on that slide if depth charge is on there, but that's a brand name of a product that we typically are going to use for lilies, as well as Navigate. Navigate is going to be a granular that's going to have 2,4-D in it. And the depth charge is going to have flumioxazin and 2,4-D in it. So yes, 2,4-D can be a good option. Just make sure that it is going to be aquatic labeled, and you follow your rates on it.
Okay, another one from F. Hernandez. What kind of weeds, grass, or vegetation should be removed from ponds, such as torpedo grass or cattails?
So anytime we're talking about aquatic weeds, there's non-native and native ones, there's invasive ones. You really want to remove the ones that are going to be invasive. Hydrilla is a bad one that can take over a pond. Cattails will grow in the shallow areas of a pond. If it's an invasive plant and it's taken over and you can't access the pond and use it the way that you want to use it, whether it be swimming, boating, fishing, that's when you're going to want to take measures to treat and then preventative measures to keep that plant from getting back into the pond.
Okay, next question is from Sane. Won't a herbicide application to a large amount of emergent or floating plants cause a large change in water chemistry as the treated plants die and break down? And won't the breaking down plants add a lot to the pond muck layer, reducing the stormwater capacity?
So yeah, when you're doing herbicide treatments, you can change the water chemistry a little bit. You're definitely going to add some nutrients into the pond from that plant die-off. Most literature is probably going to recommend treating a third to a half of the pond at a time to kind of mitigate that risk. When those materials and stuff break down, when you're talking about a plant like, say, duckweed or watermeal or azolla, that product is so small once it's dead and died that it probably doesn't generate that much muck on the bottom to start with. Aeration can help facilitate natural processes that'll help break down muck over time. So that's a good preventative measure to put into your pond. And then as far as treating, you always want to follow the label and you want to go off of the label rate of the chemical so that you're not being toxic to the fish or the invertebrates or the plants in the pond. Or you want to kill the plants, but you don't want to kill the fish. And then, as I said before, if you want to play it safe, treating a third of the pond at a time is a good option for that.
Question from Chris Patton. Can you please discuss relative weight charts and how to use them?
Yeah.
Specifically, in a pond with stunted bass, which fish should I remove? Is it based on the relative weight chart?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we went over, the fisheries management part of it, and some of those, harvesting guidelines, one way that I really recommend is to go by a relative weight index chart. By pulling lengths and weights of your fish that you're catching, you're going to be able to see, is that fish, 100% growth relative weight? Is he in the 85% range? And typically what I would recommend doing is pull a good survey sample of maybe, 10, 15, 20 fish. Let's see what the averages are. If the averages are, in that 85 range or in that 90 range, let's start by removing all of our, our fish that are in 80% or 85% growth rate first. And then, next year we can do the same thing again. And hopefully we're seeing now our fish average in the 90 to 95%. And we'll do the same thing again by pulling our ones that are a little bit lower on that relative weight index chart. And all it means is that maybe they just, weren't as genetically gifted, just weren't as an aggressive as a feeder. But that way we're making sure that we're removing our fish. We're saving our food sources for our fish that are going to be, a little bit more aggressive, have a little bit better genetics and so on and so forth.
So Chris also wants to know, does egg lime need to be applied equally across the pond, or can it be simply dumped into one place? Because he says, I only have one place where a truck can access the pond.
So if you're using ag lime, we typically always try to get good equal coverage across the pond. I wouldn't recommend dumping it all in one spot. The best way to apply the ag lime that we found is to use a boat and maybe an 8-foot piece of plywood and use it as like a barge system and spray it off the bow of the boat as you do, cross sections of the pond, making sure you're doing overlaps to get good equal coverage. So yeah, I would try to get equal coverage if at all possible. I wouldn't dump it in one spot.
And then Chris wants to know, can you discuss how to take a pH sample? Is it the mud you're testing or the water?
Yeah, so I mean, you can take water samples, both ways. We're testing our soil because that's what's, affecting our pH. But, for an easy, quick test, you can also go buy, a water testing kit that has, pH and alkalinity and hardness, ammonia and all sorts of different parameters, but you can take a water sample that way as well. And that's going to give you an idea of what that is. I would keep in mind though, that your pH can swing, whether that's through the day a little bit, or through the season, depending on your alkalinity and hardness levels, to help control that swing.
All right. This anonymous attendee was wondering, any experience with wildlife scrapes, not deep enough to be ponds, but still provide water for wildlife?
Probably not too much. We do some duck impoundment construction where we might, facilitate waterfowl habitat. I'm not sure if he's talking about just natural areas in the woods that have water in them. We do have a couple properties that we manage that have those types of features. They're ponds because they're holding water, but they're just low areas in the woods that have water. Probably would need a little bit more detail on what the question is, what they're trying to do with it.
All right. Question here is from Bays. How long after filling a new pond should one wait before taking water samples and stocking fish? Is there a timeline for allowing ponds to equalize?
So you can give it as much time as it needs, but as soon as it fills full of water, you can start stocking it. You can take your water samples whenever, depending on what the cost is to you, But once the pond is full, it's probably going to be a little turbid for a little while, but typically ponds will naturalize and that turbidity will settle out over time. But as soon as it has water in it, you can start stocking it. Most of the time we're stocking ponds in the spring and the fall, early spring, later fall, because the temperatures are a little more mild at that point, and that's a little bit less stress on the fish. But once the pond has water, and you can typically have at it if it's the right time of the year.
All right, from Tiff Way, would you apply these pond management techniques to a shallow water area for wildlife as well? What are some important distinctions between management for a pond versus a shallow water area?
Yeah, so I think it would depend on what kind of wildlife are using the area. If you're trying to do vegetation control, and these are, this is deer and ducks that are coming in, unlike our livestock, we can't keep them, out. So we may not want to do herbicide applications in those areas. So again, that's kind of one of those questions you really need to know, what kind of wildlife application you're using it for. Is this a duck impoundment, or is this a watering hole in the woods that, all of our different wildlife are just visiting throughout the day?
Okay, next question is from Ruth. And would you recommend planting shrubs and trees around your pond? And if so, what type?
Yeah, so a little bit of shade is great. There's nothing wrong with a couple of trees and a couple of shrubs. Typically, if you're going to do shrubs, you're going to want, it depends on, again, how are you going to use the pond. If you want a border around the pond, that's great. But if you're trying to fish the pond, you're going to want to have some open areas so you can get down into the pond. Species wise, I don't have any ones off the top of my head, but you definitely don't want to put anything around the pond that's going to be invasive. One of the ones that comes to mind is like a black willow. Those guys grow up pretty quick and they tend to have a pretty invasive root system. So if you ever wanted to get them out, it's very hard. So yeah, any kind of shade tree is fine, especially if you want to go sit down around a pond bank and not be in the sun.
One more note on that too is one consideration to take into effect is with planting trees, especially on a dam, you're going to want to take in consideration that tree may be small now, but things like big pines and oaks and, 30, 40, 50 years from now, if a storm does come in and blows that tree over, if it's on the dam, it could cause a problem.
All right, from Jim Spencer, will grass carp increase turbidity?
So grass carp can increase turbidity. As vegetation gets low and they start, going and looking for it more, moving around in the mud more, at high rates, they can. Channel catfish can as well. I think that's all going to depend on the size of your pond, the deepness of it, and the number of grass carp that you put into it.
Okay, question from Judy Bolton. How thick of an EPDM liner do you recommend for ponds?
So we don't do a ton of the rubber liners because they can get quite expensive. I think the measurement, and don't quote me on this, but I think the measurement on the liners that we have done here in the past, we've done one or two the past 3 or 4 years. I think they're 5 millimeter liners. Usually we're gonna put in a clay liner, but if it's a smaller pond, a smaller application, a rubber liner might be a good option. But the bigger ones can get quite expensive.
So next question is from an anonymous attendee. They have a 3-acre, their pond is a 3-acre wetland fed by farm field tile in a 300-acre watershed. Are there plants that could help to reduce the chemical runoff if established in the shallower end of the wetland?
Yeah, there's different types of beneficial vegetation that you could plant, and you plant them based off of, water depth. Lilies are great in ponds. You just got to understand that lilies can be one of those plants that a fragrant water lily can take over an area if it's a shallow area for sure. If you're able to go up front of the pond and maybe put in one of those settling bays, a 4-bay, a settling pool, that could help reduce some nutrients up front, and maybe that's the area that you plant up real heavy to kind of consolidate those natural plants. There's a bunch of border or shoreline plants that you can plant that help as well. Rushes, irises, pickerel weed, lizard's tail can be great. Those aren't too invasive and they're all natives. So we do a lot of stormwater plantings with those. As with any plant though, if it gets really happy, you just got to kind of take into consideration how it's growing and if it's causing you a problem once it's planted. I would avoid anything that's labeled invasive. Don't go plant cattails because cattails can monocrop out and take over all the area.
Next question from anonymous attendee is they have a 10-acre lot that is 350 feet wide and on a 2% slope. What would you recommend for a pond or several ponds to use for farm operations? They would like to have an aquaponics operation, harvest and hold water and use it to irrigate crops.
You'll take that one, that's kind of technical.
Yeah, I mean, so they've got how big of an acreage, Robert?
It's a 10-acre lot that is 350 feet wide. How about I suggest, if it's okay with you guys, they email one of you that question so you can follow up with them.
That would be great. Let us think about that one for a minute. It's a little bit more technical.
Yeah.
So whoever asked that question, please take, they have their email addresses there on the slide they're sharing with us. You might want to reach out to them so they can, since it is more of a technical question. Next one is, do you need a fishing permit to fish in your pond on your property? Also, what time frame period before you can catch fish in your pond?
So as far as a fishing license, I don't believe you need a fishing license to fish on a private pond. If it's a truly private pond, I would double check with the Wildlife Resource Commission on that. That's another one of the ones, if you want to email us, we can follow up. We got some contacts over there that we work with. What was the second part of that question, Robert?
What time frame period before you can fish in your pond? I'm thinking, for example, if somebody built a pond and added fish, or you restocked it for the beginning, what would be that time frame?
Yeah, it's just going to depend on the size of fish you put in. If you put in fingerlings, typically in that slide and in the literature, you can harvest a sunfish the second year. You can harvest a bass in the third year when they're 12 to 14 inches. The answer for that is when they're catchable. Fingerlings aren't going to go, bite the bait. You're not going to be able to catch them. But if you stock adult fish, you're going to be able to catch them pretty much as soon as you put them in the water once they're naturalized to the pond. It just depends on the size of the fish that you stock.
And one of my extension colleagues that's on today's webinar says you do not need a fishing license to fish in a private pond. So,
yeah.
So I think that will answer that question.
Perfect.
for, and this may be again too technical, but, for the small 20 by 20 pond that we mentioned earlier, that is an embankment pond being filled by a seasonal stream. What do you recommend for the drain overflow system?
So with the drain on a pond that small, you could probably just go with, a 4 to 6 inch PVC Schedule 40 pipe. Those are typically cheap options to put in an outlet system. If you want to get fancy, you can do a CMP pipe from a pipe supplier. But typically on a small application like that, a PVC pipe, 6 inches to 8 inches, with some form of trash rack on the top. If you can install it on the bottom of the pond at the vertical and turn it horizontal and let it daylight on the toe of the dam, that's going to help reduce erosion issues because you don't have water flowing down the backside of the dam. But PVC, anywhere from 4 to 8 inches would be my first thought on that.
Next question from Tiff Way is, do you have any recommendations for native vegetation to include on a duck impoundment? And I'm going to make the assumption that this is in North Carolina.
Yeah, so I'm not the wildlife guy here, but we do have a wildlife division that does nothing but that. But some things that come to mind would be duck potato, arrow arum. There's different types of pond weeds that you can purchase and install that can provide food for waterfowl. That would be a good one if they don't mind emailing, me or Caleb. We can get them an extensive list of all the things that we've planted, because we do have a division that builds duck impoundments, plants food for ducks, and that's their primary consideration, is getting waterfowl into areas.
All right. And the last question we have from Tiff Way is, what kind of amendments or construction recommendations do you have for constructing pond embankments with Triassic Basin soils?
That one's probably a little bit more that I can come off the top of my head, Robert. That would be another one of those technical ones. If they want to reach out, I've got a construction division here that specializes in our pond construction. They work with the engineers. They'll be able to get him an answer for sure.
All right. Let me just scan our chat real quick because some people had typed in questions there. Here's a question. Can you explain the benefit for using barley straw on LJ in weed control? Penn State recommends 2 to 3 bales per acre. And can I place the entire bale in the pond at one time and location?
Yeah, so we don't do a lot of algae control with barley straw. I have heard about that. There's barley straw bales and then there's barley straw extract. We sell products for our koi pond and water garden clients, the backyard ponds that are small, 6x6, 6x8. They're really small, 400 to 1,000 gallon systems. We don't do a lot of barley straw application on larger systems. If we had that question come up, I've got to kill this filamentous algae, it would typically be one of those other products on that chemical consideration list. And it's probably going to be some form of chelated copper.
Okay, here's a question from Jason Duncan. He lives in Kentucky. They have a big problem with an overabundance of crawfish. They have burrowed into the dam and have caused a leak. Any recommendations for crawfish control? He does put a disclaimer here, and that is the pond is approximately 500 yards from an 800-acre lake, so there's always an ample supply of crawfish in the area.
Yeah. As far as control on the crawfish, stock bass. The bass will eat them. I'm sure with that many crawfish, you've probably got good sized bass in the pond. They're really high, protein dense, food for the bass. As far as any other way to, really control the population, especially with a big lake being that close, and the chance for overflow into your place. Roger, do you know any way to
stocking a predatory species would be my first guess. Maybe you can try to trap them out and have a crawfish, broil.
Yeah.
But I would recommend the largemouth bass, we stock crawfish here as a supplemental forage for the largemouth bass on those fisheries type clients that want to grow bigger bass. So that would be where my head goes at first.
All right, so with that, we're going to bring this to an end. Sorry, folks, if we didn't get to your questions. It is time to wrap up today's webinar. We're actually over a little bit, but I do want to thank our presenters, Roger and Caleb, for taking the time today. And Leslie, do you have anything you want to share with the group before we finalize things?
Yes, thank you, Bob. Roger and Caleb, thank you too for your great presentation. I just wanted to remind North Carolina Tree Farm Program members that the Triangle Pond Management is one of our business partners that offers our certified tree farmers a 10% discount on all products and services. So if you are in the North Carolina Tree Farm Program, take advantage of that discount. And then just one final reminder about our annual meeting that's coming up on June 15th. Visit our website for more information about that. And if you have questions about the North Carolina Tree Farm Program, please reach out to us. Our email is here on the screen, as well as our phone number. We're happy to talk with you about how you can get involved with our program. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for today's webinar.